A dare born of arrogance and champagne echoed through the grand halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Conrad Valerius, a man whose net worth could rival the GDP of a small nation, offered $10,000 for a moment's entertainment. His target, an invisible waitress, a woman paid to be a ghost amidst the city's elite. He expected a clumsy, awkward spectacle to amuse his cynical friends. He dared her to dance to become a pawn in his world of glittering facades. But he never imagined that in daring the waitress, he was challenging a queen. He froze the world, slowing to a halt, as she didn't just accept his challenge, she took his spotlight, his breath, and the very foundation of his world with it. The Valerius Foundation Annual Gala was less a charity event and more a peacock display for New York's upper crust. Held within the cavernous hallowed halls of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the air was thick with the scent of money, a cloying mix of imported lilies Chanel No. 5, and the subtle metallic tang of ambition. Marble statues of Roman emperors watched with stoic indifference as their modern-day equivalents drifted past in a river of silk and diamonds. At the center of this swirling galaxy of wealth sat Conrad Valerius. He wasn't merely in the room orbited him. At 34, he possessed the kind of cruel classical beauty that artists strive to capture, and that money worked tirelessly to preserve. His jaw was sharp, his eyes the color of a winter storm, and his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit fit him like a second skin. He ruled Valerius Holdings, a global empire built on his grandfather's steel and expanded by his father's ruthless forays into technology and finance. Conrad, however, ruled with a different tool, a profound, unshakable boredom. "Look at them," he murmured, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. Hyenas in tuxedos, each one smiling, each one waiting for the other to show a sign of weakness. His companion, Gideon Hayes, a man whose loyalty was as legendary as his patience, sighed softly. "They're your guests, Conrad, and they've donated generously. Generously to their own tax shelters," Conrad scoffed. "It's all a game, Gideon. A predictable, tiresome game." He scanned the crowd, his gaze flitting over socialites, tech moguls, and politicians, dismissing each one. His eyes, however, snagged on a figure moving against the current. A waitress. She was one of dozens clad in a simple, severe black uniform, designed to make her fade into the background. Yet she didn't. There was a stillness about her, a rigid control in her posture as she navigated the treacherous terrain of egos and couture gowns. She moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnatural, her back ramrod straight, her chin held at a neutral angle. While other servers hurried with a hint of nervous energy, she moved with a deliberate, almost defiant grace. Her name was Veyron. To the guests, she was a pair of hands, refilling a champagne flute or clearing a canapé plate. To herself, she was a silent observer, a cataloguer of human folly. She saw the desperation behind the dazzling smiles, the cold calculations in the warm handshakes. Each night she worked, these events was a study in anthropology, a reminder of the world she once brushed against and the one she now served. Conrad watched her for a full 10 minutes. He noticed the way she avoided eye contact, not out of subservience, but out of a profound disinterest. She was a ghost by choice, and that to a man who demanded the attention of everyone in his orbit was an intolerable offense. The final straw was when Lachlan Kane Conrad's chief rival in both business and society attempted to flag her down with an imperious snap of his fingers. Veyron, who was holding a tray laden with delicate flutes, paused, turned her head just enough to acknowledge the sound, and then continued on her predetermined path to another table without breaking stride. A low chuckle rumbled through Conrad's group as Kane's face tightened with indignation. "Well, well," Conrad said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "The ghost has teeth." He beckoned a nearby waiter. "You. What's her name?" The young man glanced nervously towards Veyron. "Veyron, sir." Veyron. Veyron, Conrad repeated, tasting the name. He leaned back, the cogs of his boredom-fueled cruelty beginning to turn. He saw the perfect opportunity to liven up his painfully dull evening and simultaneously put the ever-smug Lachlan Kane in his place. He raised his voice, just enough to cut through the surrounding chatter, ensuring his circle and Kane's nearby table could hear him perfectly. $10,000, he announced, the words dropping like stones into a silent pond. Heads turned. The air crackled with anticipation. $10,000, he repeated, his stormy eyes locking onto Veyron as she deposited her empty tray at a service station to the waitress. "If she'll dance with me. Right here, right now." Gideon placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Conrad, don't. This is beneath you." "Nonsense," Conrad replied, shaking him off. "It's philanthropy." He smirked. "I'm patronizing the arts." The challenge hung in the air, thick and humiliating. It was a power play, pure and simple. A billionaire amusing himself at the expense of a working woman. He was daring her to become his court jester. The crowd murmured, some with delight, others with a flicker of second-hand shame. They all watched Veyron, expecting her to flush with embarrassment, to either refuse meekly or accept with fawning gratitude. They saw a waitress, a nobody. Conrad stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow. He walked towards her, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He stopped a few feet from her, his smile a masterpiece of condescension. "Miss Veyron," he said, his voice smooth as velvet and sharp as glass. "I have a business proposition for you. One dance for $10,000. What do you say?" Veyron finally looked at him. For the first time that night, she lifted her head and met his gaze directly. Her eyes were a startlingly clear shade of blue-gray, and in their depths there was no fear, no awe, no gratitude. There was only a calm, assessing coolness that was more unsettling than any outburst would have been. She held his gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching until it was taut and uncomfortable. In that silence, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman considering an offer, weighing its terms with an unnerving serenity. And as the entire upper echelon of New York City held its breath, Veyron gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "All right," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying the faintest trace of an accent he couldn't quite place. But not to this music. A collective ripple of shock went through the assembled guests. It wasn't the acceptance that stunned them. $10,000 was a life-altering sum for someone on a caterer's wages. It was the condition, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of it. A waitress, a non-entity, was setting terms for Conrad Valerius. Conrad himself was taken aback. He had anticipated two outcomes, a flustered refusal or a fawning acceptance. This cool negotiation was not on the menu. A flicker of genuine interest sparked in his bored eyes. This was a new variable in his predictable equation. "Not to this music," he repeated, an eyebrow arching. The band was playing a soft, inoffensive jazz standard, the kind of music designed to be heard, but not listened to. And what kind of music does a $10,000 dance require? Miss Veyron's gaze swept past him to the small, elegant stage where the band was situated. "Tell your musicians to play Asturias Leyenda." The name dropped into the room with the weight of a gauntlet. A few of the more cultured guests murmured in recognition. Asturias, the famously complex and fiery piece by Isaac Albeniz, was a showpiece for a virtuoso pianist or guitarist. It was not a dance number. It was a storm. The band leader, a seasoned professional named Albert, overheard and stepped forward, his expression a mixture of confusion and professional concern. Sir Asturias isn't exactly dance music. It has no consistent rhythm for a waltz or a foxtrot. It's a solo instrumental piece. She didn't say a waltz or a foxtrot. Conrad said, his eyes never leaving Veyron's. The game had just become infinitely more interesting. He turned back to her, his smirk returning, now tinged with a genuine curiosity. An interesting choice. Are you sure you can handle it? The question is. Mr. Valerius Veyron replied, her voice still unnervingly level. Are you sure you can? This was no longer a simple dare. It was a duel. The power dynamic had subtly but seismically shifted. She wasn't just accepting his humiliation, she was co-authoring the terms of it. Lachlan Kane, watching from his table, let out a derisive snort. She's bluffing, Valerius, trying to embarrass you into backing down. Pay the girl and send her home. Lachlan's goading had the opposite effect. Conrad's pride, a colossal and fragile thing, would never allow him to retreat, especially not in front of his rival. He turned to the band leader. You heard the lady? Find a version of it you can play, an orchestral arrangement, something with passion. I'll add another 5,000 for your trouble. Albert, the band leader, now looked energized. The challenge and the money were a potent combination. He huddled with his musicians. Frantic whispers were exchanged. A tablet was produced. Sheet music searched for. After a tense minute, Albert turned back, a new light in his eyes. We have a tango arrangement, he announced. A very dramatic one. Asturias tango. It will take us a few minutes to prepare. Excellent, Conrad declared, turning back to Veyron with a flourish. You shall have your music. Veyron simply nodded again, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Was it fear? No. It was more like concentration, as if she were mentally preparing for a complex task. Gideon moved to Conrad's side, his voice a low, urgent whisper. Conrad, call this off. You're creating a scene. What if she makes a fool of herself? It will reflect poorly on you. Let it. Conrad whispered back, a thrill running through him for the first time in years. If she stumbles, it's what I paid for. If she doesn't, well, that's even better. He wasn't just bored anymore. He was intrigued, deeply. Who was this woman, this waitress, with the posture of a ballerina and the nerve of a high-stakes poker player? While the band hastily rearranged their setup, a space was cleared in the center of the room. The guests formed a circle, their phones held up like modern-day lorgnettes, ready to capture the impending spectacle for their social media feeds. The atmosphere was electric, buzzing with the cruel anticipation of a Roman circus. They were about to watch a lion devour a mouse, or perhaps witness the mouse do something entirely unexpected. Veyron stood alone in the center of the cleared space. She untied the simple black apron from around her waist, folded it neatly, and placed it on an empty chair. The action was deliberate, ritualistic. With the apron gone, the simple uniform black trousers, a crisp white shirt, looked less like a costume of servitude and more like a minimalist canvas. She then did something that caused another wave of murmurs to pass through the crowd. She reached down and slipped off her sensible rubber-soled work shoes, placing them beside the apron. She stood there in her simple black socks, grounding herself on the cold marble floor. It was an act of profound vulnerability, or perhaps of profound confidence. Conrad watched her, his initial amusement giving way to a strange sense of unease. He had intended to be the ringmaster of this circus, but he was beginning to feel like he had unleashed a creature whose nature he did not understand. He had paid for a dance, a simple transaction. But as Veyron stood there, Poised and waiting in the center of that opulent hall, he felt a dawning realization that he had purchased something far more than he had bargained for. The bandleader gave a sharp nod. A single mournful note from a cello cut through the expectant silence. Then the staccato rhythmic pulse of a piano began, sharp and insistent. The familiar frantic melody of Asturias was reborn, twisted into the dramatic, passionate framework of a tango. It was a tempest of music, full of sharp turns, sudden pauses, and explosive crescendos. It was by all accounts an impossible piece of music to dance to. Conrad stepped forward into the circle, extending a hand to her as tradition dictated. Veyron ignored it. She held up her own hand palm out, a clear signal for him to wait. She closed her eyes for a single long beat. When she opened them, the waitress was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely. Her gaze was sharp, her body thrummed with a coiled energy, and as the music swelled, she met Conrad's eyes with an expression that was no longer cool or assessing. It was a challenge, and it said without a single word, "Try to keep up." The first notes of the Asturias tango arrangement were a rapid, percussive piano riff, like frantic heartbeats against a cage of ribs. It was the sound of impending chaos of a story about to violently unfold. Conrad, still standing with his hand awkwardly extended, expected Veyron to take a tentative first step, to perhaps attempt a clumsy box step to the complex rhythm. He was wrong. So profoundly, monumentally wrong. Veyron didn't move towards him. Instead, she exploded into motion alone. Her first movement was a sharp, impossibly fast sequence of footwork, a zapateado, that echoed the piano's staccato rhythm. Her feet, clad only in black socks, slapped against the marble with a precision that was breathtaking. The sound was not a clumsy shuffle, but a series of controlled percussive strikes, turning the floor into her instrument. She wasn't just hearing the music, she was embodying it. A collective gasp swept through the room. Phones that had been raised to capture a humiliation were now capturing a revelation. Her arms, which had been held loosely at her sides, snapped into position, carving sharp, elegant lines in the air. Her torso remained impossibly still, while her legs and feet moved with a blur of speed and precision. She executed a series of quick, sharp turns giros that were so perfectly balanced, so controlled she seemed to defy gravity. This was not the timid movement of a waitress. This was the language of a professional, a dialect spoken with the grammar of years of relentless, agonizing training. Conrad stood frozen, a statue in the eye of the hurricane she was creating. His mind, usually a fortress of cold logic and calculated moves, was a blank slate of pure shock. He was a man who prided himself on knowing every angle, predicting every outcome. But this was a variable from another universe. The woman he had intended to lead to control for his own amusement was now commanding the entire room with a power he couldn't comprehend. The music shifted the frantic piano, giving way to a long, melancholic phrase from the cello, and Veyron's dancing transformed with it. The sharp, percussive movements melted into a fluid, expressive sorrow. She moved across the floor with a series of slow, deliberate steps, her body telling a story of longing and loss. Her back arched, her arms extended, as if reaching for a phantom partner, her expression one of sublime tragedy. It was raw, it was emotional, and it was utterly captivating. And then she looked directly at him, her eyes blazing with an intensity he had never seen in another human being, issued a silent, undeniable command. Now, as if pulled by an invisible string, Conrad moved. His own training years of society, ballroom lessons forced upon him by his mother, kicked in on pure instinct, a forgotten muscle memory rising from the depths. He stepped forward as the music surged back into its fiery, passionate theme. Veyron met him not with the soft deference of a ballroom partner, but with the firm, demanding connection of a true tango dancer. Her hand didn't rest in his. It gripped it, a conduit of energy and intention. Her other hand pressed firmly against his back, not asking for a lead, but entering into a dialogue, a battle of wills expressed through movement. What followed was not a dance, in the traditional sense. It was a confrontation. Veyron led. She, the waitress, was leading him, the billionaire, across the floor of his own gala. She guided him through intricate steps he barely knew her body, a firm, unyielding frame against his. She initiated a series of cicadas where her leg swept into his space, displacing his own, a move of daring and dominance. She leaned into him, forcing him into a deep, dramatic dip that he barely managed to support, his muscles straining. The world outside their dance ceased to exist. The murmuring crowd, the flashing phones, the smug face of Lachlan Kane, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. There was only the driving, relentless music, and the woman in his arms who felt less like a partner and more like a force of nature. He could feel the lean, hard strength in her frame, the result of a lifetime of discipline. He could see the absolute focus in her eyes, a focus that saw right through his money, his name, his power, and connected with something more fundamental within him. She wasn't just dancing, she was speaking. Each sharp turn was a retort, each sensual sweep of her leg a question, each moment of perfect stillness a judgment. She was telling a story of pride, of pain, of a spirit that refused to be bought or belittled. The climax of the piece arrived a chaotic, thundering crescendo, where all the instruments seemed to wage war. Veyron responded by pulling Conrad into a final, breathtaking spin that seemed to go on forever. She was a whirlwind of controlled fury, and he was the anchor, the stunned, silent center, around which she revolved. Then silence. The final note hung in the air, vibrating with an almost unbearable tension. They were frozen in a final pose. Veyron was arched back in a deep, dramatic lunge, one hand gripping his, the other thrown out towards the ceiling in a gesture of triumphant defiance. Her chest was heaving, her face flushed, and her eyes, locked on his, were alight with a fire that seemed to scorch his very soul. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the ragged sound of two people breathing. The entire coterie of New York's elite was struck dumb, their cynical masks shattered, replaced by expressions of raw, unadulterated awe. Then a single person began to clap. It was Gideon. His solitary applause was like a stone that started an avalanche. The room erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured applause of a society gala. It was a roar, a standing ovation of thunderous, genuine admiration. People were cheering, whistling their faces alive with an excitement that no amount of champagne could ever induce. But Conrad didn't hear it. He was still lost in Veyron's eyes. In that moment, he saw everything. He saw his own petty arrogance, his casual cruelty laid bare and found wanting. He had dared a waitress to dance for his amusement, and in response, she had taken the stage, stolen the spotlight, and shown him what true power, what true artistry really looked like. He, Conrad Valerius, the man who owned skylines and commanded boardrooms, was completely and utterly undone. He had offered $10,000 for a spectacle, and he had gotten it. But the spectacle wasn't her humiliation. It was his own. The applause crashed over them in waves, a deafening tribute to the performance that had just shattered the gala's polished veneer. But Veyron seemed impervious to it. As Conrad slowly helped her rise from their final dramatic pose, her entire demeanor shifted. The fire in her eyes banked. The fierce artist retreated, and the stoic waitress returned, like a mask being lowered back into place. She pulled her hand from his, the connection breaking with a startling finality. She gave the cheering crowd a single brief and completely neutral nod of acknowledgement. It was not the bow of a performer milking the moment. It was the curt dismissal of someone who had finished a job. Without another glance at Conrad, she walked directly to the chair where she had left her things. She slipped her feet back into her sensible work shoes, tied the black apron around her waist, and in doing so, completed her transformation back into a ghost. She was once again part of the catering staff, an anonymous figure in a black and white uniform. Conrad, still standing in the center of the floor, felt a strange sense of vertigo. It was as if the world had just spun off its axis and was struggling to right itself. His mind was still reeling, trying to process the chasm between the woman who had just commanded his body and soul on the dance floor and the one who was now calmly preparing to go back to work. He saw his chief of security, a formidable man named Robert, approach her with a discreet envelope. The prize money. He had instructed Robert to have it ready. Veyron took the envelope, gave a small, formal nod, and tucked it into a pocket inside her uniform jacket. No smile, no gushing thanks, just a simple, clean transaction. This more than anything jolted Conrad from his stupor. He had orchestrated this. He had intended it as a display of his power, his ability to make the world dance to his tune for a price. She had fulfilled her part of the bargain, taken the money, and was now walking away, treating him and his grand gesture with the same dispassionate efficiency as if she had just served him a glass of water. He had to talk to her. He needed to understand. He started towards her, but Gideon intercepted him, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Let her go, Conrad. You've made your point, and frankly so has she. Let the evening end." End. Conrad's voice was hoarse. It just began. He brushed past Gideon, his eyes locked on Veyron's retreating form. She was heading towards a service exit, her shift likely over. He saw Lachlan Kane stand up, a strange, calculating expression on his face, as if he too were about to approach her. The thought of Kane speaking to her of that smug rival getting to her first sent a hot, unfamiliar surge of possessiveness through him. "Miss Veyron," he called out, his voice sharper and louder than he intended. Several guests turned the conversations that had just begun to restart, now hushing again. Veyron stopped at the doorway but didn't turn around. She merely paused, her back still to him. "Wait," he commanded, walking towards her. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, but he didn't care. He stopped a few feet behind her. That was... He searched for a word, but his usual vocabulary of business and conquest failed him. Extraordinary. Brilliant. Magnificent. They all felt cheap, inadequate. "It was a dance," she said, her voice quiet, directed at the door in front of her. "You paid. I danced. The transaction is complete." "No," he insisted. "That wasn't just a dance." "Who are you?" Finally she turned, but only her head. She looked at him over her shoulder, and her eyes were cold again, the impenetrable grey of a winter sea. "I am the waitress you paid $10,000 to entertain your friends." The words were a slap in the face. She was throwing his own shallow intentions back at him, refusing to let him reframe the moment as anything other than the ugly spectacle he had designed it to be. "I want to apologize," he said the words, feeling foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "My behavior was inexcusable." A flicker of something cynicism perhaps crossed her face. "You have nothing to apologize for, Mr. Valerius. You got exactly what you wanted. An evening's entertainment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go." She turned and pushed through the service door, disappearing from view. The door swung shut, leaving Conrad standing alone, feeling more dismissed and insignificant than he ever had in his life. He had been the hunter, setting a simple trap, and now he was the one left, ensnared, haunted by a ghost who had vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. He returned to his table, the adrenaline of the moment draining away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The gala was ruined for him. The meaningless chatter, the clinking glasses, it all felt like noise from a distant world. "Find her," he said to Gideon, his voice a low command. Gideon sighed. "Conrad, what are you going to do? Offer her a job. She's a waitress who can dance. Leave the poor woman alone. You've probably embarrassed her enough for one lifetime." Embarrassed, Conrad laughed a short, humorless sound. "Gideon, did you see her face? She wasn't embarrassed. She was judging me. She was judging all of us." He leaned forward, his voice intense. "That was not a party trick. That wasn't a few salsa lessons. That was years of training. That was a lifetime of discipline. A woman like that is not a waitress. She's a waitress for a reason. I want to know what it is." His mind was racing. Who was Veyron? Why was a woman with the talent to silence the Met working for a catering company? What tragedy, what failure, what secret had led her to this life of invisibility? He was no longer bored. He was obsessed. "I don't want a summary," Gideon Conrad said, his eyes dark with purpose. "I want everything. I want to know where she was born, where she went to school, who her parents were, what she ate for breakfast. I want to know why a woman who can dance like a fallen angel is serving champagne to buffoons like Lachlan Kane." Gideon knew that look. It was the same look Conrad got when he was about to orchestrate a hostile takeover of a rival corporation. It was a look of relentless, predatory focus. The hunt had begun. Only this time, the prize wasn't a company or a contract. It was the story of the ghost who had danced in his spotlight and then vanished into the shadows. Gideon Hayes was ruthlessly efficient. It was a quality Conrad Valerius paid him handsomely for. While Conrad was known for his visionary, often impulsive strategic leaps, Gideon was the master of logistics, the man who turned his boss's grand declarations into actionable intelligence. Finding information on one waitress he assumed would be a trivial task. He started with the catering company, Elan Events. A discreet call to the owner, sweetened with a significant donation to his son's university fund, yielded Veyron's employee file. The information was sparse. An address in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, a social security number, a start date of 2 years ago. No emergency contacts listed. Previous employment was listed simply as various, with no specifics. It was a digital dead end, a carefully curated blank slate. "She's a ghost, just as you said," Gideon reported to Conrad the next morning in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park. "Her official record is clean but shallow. It feels deliberately anonymous." "Dig deeper," Conrad ordered, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He hadn't slept. The image of Veyron's fiery performance was burned into his mind. Cross-reference the social security number. Financial records, education, travel. There has to be a thread. Gideon set his team to work. They were analysts and data miners who normally tracked stock market fluctuations and corporate espionage. Now their formidable skills were focused on one woman. For 24 hours they hit walls. Veyron paid her rent in cash. She had no credit cards, only a simple debit account with a small local credit union. She had no social media presence, no digital footprint. It was as if she had been born the day she started working for Elan Events. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. One of the junior analysts, a clever young woman named Keisha, decided to ignore the name Veyron and run a facial recognition search on the high-resolution images from the gala's press photographers. They had dozens of stunning shots of the dance. Keisha ran the software cross-referencing the images against a global database of news articles, arts publications, and performance archives. For hours, the system churned through billions of faces. Then it pinged, a single match from an article in a dance journal dated 6 years prior. The photo was a black and white promotional shot. The woman in the picture was younger, her hair was longer, and her face was full of a fierce, joyful ambition. But there was no mistaking the eyes, the posture, the bone structure. The name under the photo, however, was not Veyron. It was Helena Veyron. "We have her," Gideon said, walking into Conrad's office and placing a tablet on his desk. The tablet displayed the article. The headline read, "The Phoenix from the East, Helena Veyron, takes the American Ballet Theatre by storm." Conrad sat down, his heart pounding, with a strange mix of vindication and dread. He began to read. The story that unfolded was one of breathtaking talent and devastating tragedy. Helena Veyron had been a prodigy. Born in St. Petersburg, Russia, she had been accepted into the prestigious Vaganova Ballet Academy at the age of 10. Her instructors described her as having a once-in-a-generation talent, combining flawless Russian technique with a fiery, passionate expressiveness that was all her own. She quickly became the star pupil, destined for a prima ballerina role at the Mariinsky Theatre. But she was ambitious. She didn't just want to be a star in Russia. She wanted the world. At 18, she defected a dramatic and highly publicized move and was granted asylum in the United States, where she was immediately signed as a principal dancer with the American Ballet Theatre ABT in New York. For 5 years, she was a sensation. The articles Gideon's team unearthed were filled with glowing reviews. "A divine fury on the stage," one critic wrote. "Veyron doesn't just dance, she ignites," said another. She was particularly famous for her partnership with another rising star, a charismatic and technically brilliant dancer named Dante Volkov. Veyron and Volkov were unstoppable. Their chemistry was legendary both on and off the stage. They were the golden couple of the ballet world, pushing the boundaries of the art form, even beginning to choreograph their own more modern pieces. Their magnum opus was set to be a radical reinterpretation of Carmen, a fusion of classical ballet and passionate aggressive tango, a project Helena had poured her soul into for over a year. And then it all came crashing down. Gideon had pulled the police reports, the hospital records, and the flurry of tabloid articles that followed. 6 years ago, just 2 weeks before the premiere of their Carmen, Helena Veyron was the victim of a hit-and-run. A speeding taxi, a careless driver who ran a red light. The result was catastrophic, a shattered tibia and a severely damaged ankle. Her dancing career was over, instantly, irrevocably. The articles that followed were heartbreaking. They detailed her grueling recovery, her painful attempts at rehabilitation, and the slow, agonizing realization that she would never again perform at an elite level. But the physical pain was eclipsed by a deeper betrayal. While she was still in the hospital, Dante Volkov premiered their Carmen. He had made minor alterations to the choreography and registered the entire production under his name alone. He took sole credit for their shared dream. When confronted by the press, he gave a devastatingly cold interview, claiming Helena's emotional instability after the accident had made collaboration impossible, and that in truth, the core genius of the work had always been his. The ballet world, a place of fierce loyalties and even fiercer rivalries, was split. But Dante was the one still on stage, still performing, still brilliant. Helena was a ghost, a tragic story. Over time, Dante's version of events became the accepted narrative. He became an international superstar. Helena Veyron, the fallen prodigy, simply disappeared. There was one final crucial piece of information. a small buried article in a local Queen's newspaper from a year after her disappearance. It was a human interest story about community fundraising. It mentioned Helena Veyron raising money for her younger brother Mikhail, who suffered from a rare congenital heart defect and required ongoing prohibitively expensive medical care. Conrad leaned back in his chair, the tablet feeling heavy in his hands. It all clicked into place. The name change from Helena to Veyron, a way to bury her past. The waitressing job, a means to an end, a way to make money for her brother, without the scrutiny or pity of the world that had discarded her. Her posture, her grace, the coiled power in her movements, it was the ghost of a prima ballerina. Her choice of music, Asturias, a piece known for its passionate Spanish flair, likely a nod to the Carmen that had been stolen from her. The tango, the dance of conflict and passion, was the language of her stolen masterpiece. Her dance at the gala wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection, a furious, defiant declaration from a queen who had been forced to live in exile, reminding the world and herself of who she truly was. And his dare, his crass, arrogant $10,000 dare, had been the catalyst. He had intended to humiliate a waitress. Instead, he had unwittingly provided the stage for a fallen star to reclaim a piece of her stolen sky. A deep, unfamiliar feeling washed over him. It was a complex cocktail of shame, admiration, and a fierce, protective anger on her behalf. "Gideon," he said, his voice quiet but steely, "find out who Dante Volkov's current patrons are. Find out who funds his productions, who sits on his boards. Dig into every corner of his life." He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city that had both built and broken the incredible woman he had met 2 nights ago. "And get me the address of that community center in Queens." He was no longer just a hunter trying to solve a mystery. He was a man who had stumbled upon a great injustice, and for the first time in his life, he felt a powerful, undeniable urge to make it right. The address Gideon provided led Conrad not to a prestigious academy, but to a converted warehouse in a quiet industrial section of Queens. The hand-painted sign read, "Astoria Community Arts Collective." Leaving his usual armor of wealth behind, swapping the chauffeured Rolls-Royce for a simple sedan and the designer suit for a plain sweater, Conrad stepped into her world. The space was vast and unadorned, smelling of sweat-rosin and hard work. Sunlight streamed through large, grimy windows, illuminating the worn wooden floor where about 15 children were gathered. At their center was Veyron. Dressed in simple sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair in a severe bun, she was a different person entirely. Here she was not a waitress, nor a fiery performer, but a patient and focused teacher. "No, Leo," she said, her voice gentle but firm as she adjusted a small boy's posture. "Don't hold your breath. The music must breathe through you." Again. Conrad stood by the door, an intruder in this sacred space. He watched for nearly half an hour, mesmerized. He saw a small, genuine smile on her face as she encouraged a girl who stumbled and celebrated a boy who finally nailed a turn. This was not a fallen star wallowing in bitterness. This was a woman who, having lost her grand stage, had built a new one where her art still mattered profoundly. Here, surrounded by children, she looked free. When the class ended, she finally saw him. The smile vanished, replaced by a guarded, impenetrable mask. "What are you doing here, Valerius?" she asked, her voice cold. "I came to apologize," he said, approaching slowly, properly, and to understand. He decided to cut through the pretense. Helena. The use of her real name was a direct hit. She flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. "You had me investigated," she stated, her voice laced with contempt. "A man like you can't stand a loose thread. Everything must be categorized and filed away. I had to know who I saw dance that night, he admitted, his voice sincere. And I saw the injustice. What Dante Volkov did to you. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Injustice. That's the way of the world. The powerful take and the talented are left with memories. It's a lesson I learned the hard way. This was his moment, he thought, to fix it. To use his power for good. I want to help. He said the words, feeling clumsy. I could fund this place. Give you a grant to set up your own professional studio. You could choreograph again. You wouldn't have to serve tables. He thought the offer was generous, a clear solution. He was wrong. The look she gave him was one of furious, offended pride. He had managed to insult her on a level he couldn't even comprehend. You still don't get it, do you? She said, her voice trembling with restrained rage. You think your money can fix my life? My life isn't broken. I have my brother, whose care I work for. I have these children, whose lives I get to be a part of. I have my work. It's honest. It's real. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. You think this is beneath me? Let me tell you what is beneath me. Pretending for people I don't respect. Dancing for the approval of men who see art as another asset to be acquired. I did that for years. I will never do it again. What I do here in this room matters more than any performance I ever gave for a crowd of wealthy patrons. So take your money and your pity and get out of my court. Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow, laying his own arrogance bare. He had seen her strength, yet he had still treated her like a problem to be solved with a checkbook. He was about to offer a real, humbled apology when his phone buzzed. It was Gideon, who never called unless it was urgent. He answered, his voice grim. What is it you were right to have me look into? Volkov, Gideon said, his tone tense. His career is propped up. He has significant debts. But that's not the important part. Conrad. I found the through line. The primary patron of his current production, his biggest financial backer for the last 3 years, who Conrad asked, a sense of dread pooling in his stomach. Kane Industries, Gideon said. His patron is Lachlan Kane. The world tilted. Conrad's head snapped up, his eyes locking on Helena. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Lachlan Kane's strange, calculating expression at the gala as he watched her dance. It wasn't a coincidence. And then the final monstrous piece of the puzzle slammed into his mind. The hit and run, a speeding taxi, a driver who was never found. Lachlan Kane was a predator who didn't leave things to chance. Gideon Conrad, said his voice, dropping to a deadly whisper, the chaos of the revelation solidifying into cold, hard purpose. I want you to find every taxi driver in New York with a gambling problem or a criminal record from 6 years ago. Find out who paid their debts. Do it now. He hung up. The personal shame he felt was suddenly dwarfed by a monstrous possibility. This wasn't just a story of artistic betrayal and a tragic accident. It was something far darker, a crime hidden in plain sight. He looked at Helena, this incredible woman who had built a life of meaning from the ashes of a life that hadn't just ended, it had been deliberately destroyed. And his lifelong rival, Lachlan Kane, was standing right at the center of it all. The next 2 weeks were a silent, furious storm. While Conrad maintained his public facade, his private resources were mobilized in a singular hunt. Gideon's team masters of the digital and financial underworld excavated a 6-year-old crime. The trail was cold, but Valerius's influence was a fire that burned through the dust. They found him a former taxi driver named Patrick Flynn, living a quiet life in Florida, paid for by an anonymous lottery win that coincided perfectly with the month after Helena's accident. Armed with irrefutable proof of the transaction, Conrad secured a full confession. The driver, haunted by guilt, admitted he was hired not to kill, but to cripple. He was paid to shatter a ballerina's leg to end her career. The money was traced through a shell corporation directly back to a private slush fund controlled by one man, Lachlan Kane. It was a horrifying mosaic of corporate predation. Kane hadn't stumbled upon a rising star in Dante Volkov. He had created one by brutally extinguishing another. He had seen the genius in the Veyron-Volkov partnership, identified Helena as the unyielding visionary, and had her surgically removed from the equation. He acquired her art by breaking her body. Conrad didn't go to the police. Kane was too insulated, the case too old. Veyron deserved a reckoning, not a protracted legal battle. She deserved her spotlight back. He found her at the Astoria Community Arts Collective, the humble warehouse that served as her true court. He waited until her last student had left before approaching. "It wasn't an accident, Helena," he said, his voice low and heavy with the weight of his discovery. It was Lachlan Kane. He laid it all out. The driver, the money, the confession. He watched the color drain from her face as the random tragedy that had defined her life reshaped itself into a deliberate act of malice. The shock, the horror, and then a slow burning understanding. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice fragile for the first time. "I want to give you back the stage he stole," Conrad said. "Entirely on your terms." His plan was audacious. The New York Arts Vanguard Awards, the city's most prestigious cultural event, was in 3 days. The keynote performance was a piece by the now world-renowned Dante Volkov, presented by his patron, Lachlan Kane. "I sit on the board," Conrad stated simply. "I can make a last-minute change to the program, a surprise addition. I want you to dance right before them. Dance the truth. I will handle the rest." Fair warred with a primal artistic fury in her eyes. It was a terrifying proposition to return to the world that had discarded her. But the flicker of the fighter he'd seen at the gala ignited. "I won't dance his Carmen," she said, her voice gathering strength. "I will dance my own story. Whatever you want," he promised. "The stage is yours." For 2 frantic days, Helena worked with an intensity that bordered on possession. The choreography poured out of her the story of the last 6 years. She chose Arvo Pärt's haunting Spiegel im Spiegel, a piece that mirrored her own journey from brokenness to quiet strength. The night of the awards at Lincoln Center was a glittering affair. Lachlan Kane was in the front row, preening beside a smug Dante Volkov. They were the evening's main event, oblivious to the guillotine poised above them. The host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special unannounced performance, a story of resilience and the enduring power of the human spirit. Please welcome Helena Veyron." A stunned silence fell. In the front row, Kane's smile froze. Volkov went pale. Helena emerged not in sequins or silk, but in a simple flowing white dress, her feet bare against the stage. As the first spare notes of the piano began, her dance started on the floor. Her movements were fractured, contorted, embodying the blinding pain of her injury and the sharp agony of betrayal. She was a broken thing, dragging herself through the darkness. Then, as the violin's sorrowful melody joined the piano, she began to rise. Her dance transformed, illustrating the slow, arduous steps of healing. It was the story of teaching children, of finding purpose in a small, dusty room, of rebuilding a life from ruins. It was quiet, understated, and utterly devastating in its emotional honesty. In the final section, as the music swelled, Helena unleashed her power. It was not the confrontational fire of the tango, but a soaring dance of liberation. powerful leaps and breathtaking turns spoke of a spirit unchained, a declaration of survival that echoed through the silent theatre. "You didn't break me. I am still here." She ended not in a dramatic pose, but by simply standing center stage, her face turned up towards the light, her expression one of serene, absolute peace. The silence that followed was heavy with shared emotion. Then the theatre erupted, the audience rising as one in a tidal wave of applause. As Helena took a tearful bow screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. On them appeared a photo of Patrick Flynn and a notarized copy of his signed confession. Simultaneously, news alerts pinged on every phone in the auditorium. A press release from Valerius Holdings complete with the entire damning evidence trail had just gone global. Conrad watched as Kane's face twisted in a mask of panic and fury. He tried to flee, but discreet security guards were already blocking the exits. The spotlight Helena had reclaimed was now shining on him, exposing him for the entire world to see. Later, Conrad found Helena on a deserted balcony overlooking the city. The chaos of the scandal was a distant roar below. "Thank you," she said softly. "You were the one who danced," he replied. "I just turned on the lights." She gazed at the glittering skyline, a city that had once been her kingdom, then her prison, and was now once again full of possibility. "For the first time in 6 years, the ghost is gone. Helena Veyron is back," he said with a genuine smile. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something more real, a partnership forged in the pursuit of justice. He had started with a cruel dare, seeking to control a pawn for his amusement. But the pawn had upended the board, and in doing so, had shown him a better way to play the game. The waitress had taught the billionaire the meaning of true worth, and her dance, the one that stole the spotlight, had redeemed them both. That single night at the gala set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted. It wasn't just about a dance. It was about the collision of two worlds, revealing the hidden strength that lies dormant in the most unexpected places. Veyron, or rather Helena, was never just a waitress. She was a queen in exile, waiting for the right moment to reclaim her crown. Conrad Valerius began as the villain of the story, a man so insulated by wealth that he had lost his humanity. But in freezing under that spotlight, he was given a chance to thaw, to witness a power greater than his own, and choose to champion it rather than crush it. Their story is a powerful reminder that beneath the surface of our daily lives, behind the uniforms we wear and the roles we play, there are extraordinary stories of resilience, betrayal, and the unquenchable fire of the human spirit. If this story of unexpected triumph and hard-won justice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary. Click that notification bell so you never miss a moment where the underdog finally gets their day in the spotlight.